if you are that slacker barista who wasted 7 years in college studying completely useless things, now has loans and can't get a job, Joe Biden just gave you 20 grand.
What you just heard from Republican Senator Ted Cruz is exactly what the establishment Republican Party thinks about working people in this country. That they're bums, that they're trash, that they deserve absolutely no help from the individuals they elected into positions of power to make this country a better place. And as someone who worked as a barista while I was in college, I will just say it is far more difficult than anything Ted Cruz has ever had to do. But nonetheless, here he is whining about workers getting a little bit of relief from the federal government in the form of student loan debt forgiveness. Let's watch.
Holy cow, 20 grand. That, maybe you weren't going to vote in November and suddenly you just got 20 grand. And, if you can, get off the bong for a minute and head down to the voting station or just send in your mail-in ballot that the Democrats have helpfully sent you, it could drive up turnout, particularly among young people.
So that's what Ted Cruz thinks about people who put in an honest day work over at Starbucks, and I don't think it's a mistake that he's specifically mentioning baristas at a time when Starbucks stores are unionizing across the country. But if you happen to be a barista, you're a bum, and you're just addicted to that bong, right? Whereas Ted Cruz, Cenk, is a very hard worker who deserves all the corporate cash that flows into his campaign coffers, who deserves that massive return on investment that he sees in his stock portfolio as he engages in what, you and I would be considered to do as insider trading. That is what Ted Cruz is all about, but he's not rare. He is representative of what the establishment Republican Party genuinely thinks about workers in this country.
Okay, so let's get this right. Ted Cruz says, hey, Joe Biden, by relieving the debt of working class Americans by $10,000 to $20,000, is basically bribing them into voting for the Democratic Party, okay? Interesting. So now, you guys wanna know how much the carried interest loophole was worth? Because that's a thing that every Republican, including Ted Cruz, fought tooth and nail to keep. It's a tax cut for the richest people in the country. It just happened, by the way. So Kristen Sinema and other conservative Democrats helped Ted Cruz keep this. But before we do that, let's find out what Ted Cruz's motivation is. So first we go to New York Times explaining during the early phase of the 2016 campaign, Mr. Mercer, that's Robert Mercer, donated $13 million to a super PAC supporting Mr. Cruz. $13 million. Boy, he might get $10,000 or $20,000 back. Because I hear that's what they're looking for. $10,000 or $20,000. Maybe he's even gonna get $30,000. Let's find out. Mr. Mercer is in the hedge fund business, which takes advantage of the carried interest tax loophole. So how much did that save? Let's find out. Now we go to CBS News. Private equity managers and others who gain from the carried interest tax loophole benefit to the tune of up to $18 billion annually, according to the Americans for Financial Reform. Every year, the Mercers and the rest of the hedge fund and private equity businesses get $18 billion gift from Ted Cruz. And then they shovel bribes back into Ted Cruz's money. Anybody think, even if you're a right winger, the 13 million that the Mercers gave Cruz, anybody think that's not a bribe? Everybody that isn't mentally insane or a Washington DC reporter knows that's a bribe. And in return, he didn't get $10,000 or $20,000. That industry got $18 billion.
You're right about the corruption, but the other thing I want to mention is that while the Democratic establishment is whining and crying about Biden doing something that is clearly popular, on the right end of the political spectrum, you have right wingers who are fearful that Biden forgiving a portion of student loan debt is going to be so popular that it will galvanize Democratic voters and get them to show up to the polls. So do you get what I'm saying here, Cenk? Because Paul Begala, who's a mouthpiece for the Democratic establishment, went on CNN and said, this is dangerous. This could really hurt Democratic incumbents in some of these swing districts. Then you hear the Republicans and they're shaking in their boots because they realize, oh, actually helping people out financially, making their economic conditions better is actually incredibly popular with voters. This might actually hurt the Republican Party and help Joe Biden. It's amazing.
That has two amazing components to it. So number one is, well, it turns out there is something the establishment Democrats will betray Joe Biden for: corporate cash.
Yes.
So they're not just praying to the establishment leadership. They pray to the corporate donors, okay? That's who they work for. It's just that most of the time Joe Biden also happens to work for them. But the reason we gave Joe Biden credit on this issue when it was first announced is because this was good. Joe Biden did a good one on this one. We did, and so why do we say that when we mainly criticize him? Because we're fair. And you could tell in the corporate reaction and their dog's reaction to this story. But the second interesting part is, wait, I thought it was outrageous to criticize Democratic leadership on cable news. I thought it was outrageous to critique Joe Biden in mainstream media. All of a sudden, though, when you do it from a conservative perspective, no one minds. Totally okay. If a progressive criticizes him, intra-party fighting. Why did the progressives start intra-party fighting? Why don't they just bow their heads to Democratic leadership? They're causing division in the party. When conservative corporate goons like Paul Begala do it, bravo, way to cause division in the party and try to get all of our candidates to lose. Way to go, Paul, that's being honest. They're such crooks.
And I can't get over Ted Cruz referring to baristas as bums, essentially, as lazy people. When, first of all, they're not. I know from personal experience how incredibly difficult that job is. But aside from that, maybe take a good hard look at yourself, Ted Cruz. A moment of self-reflection. And if you need a little assistance, we're happy to help. Let's watch.
The Texas Republican and his family flew off to a Cancun resort on Wednesday as millions of his constituents were without power and water.
What were you thinking?
Well, look, my kids, all of us this week, this has been a hell of a week for Texas. I don't like this being used as a distraction from the real issues.
Do you regret going because of the firestorm or because you left when people were here struggling?
Look, both. Many of the people who were upset with me before we started. You can work remotely, that was my intention, but even so, I needed to be here.
So there's a massive disaster in Texas where the power grid failed during a disastrous winter storm. And the first thing Ted Cruz did was try to get on a plane and leave for a vacation in Cancun. Now you tell me who the real bum is, okay? A man who works for a governing body that has more recesses than grade school kids. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's a politician. He barely does anything in the first place. All he does is go around, collect checks from the people that are bribing him. And then they take all of August off. They take half the year off. They never even freaking work. And he has the nerve to criticize working class people who are on their feet all day long serving jerks like him. And I'm being as polite as I could possibly be. So yeah, no thank you on your fake populism, Ted Cruz, as you attack the working man every single day in service of your owners, Robert and Rebecca Mercer, let alone all the other donors. Why don't you go ask them for what your next orders are, dog?
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.